So, what really makes a leader tick? Today, we're going to do a psychological deep dive into one of the world's most polarizing figures. The source material we're looking at suggests that to really understand the man, you have to get to know the operating system that was basically coded into him as a child. Right off the bat, our source material starts at this really bold and, for a lot of people, pretty controversial idea. The argument is that for years, all the editorials, the fact checks, the moral outrage, they've all failed to really make a dent. So the author asks a question. If condemnation hasn't worked, what if we tried understanding instead?
And that, right there, is our central question for today. The source proposes this kind of psychological archaeology, digging backward from the man today all the way back to the toddler, and tracing how each and every layer of his experience built this predictable and ultimately understandable operating system.
Now, before we go any further, the author makes a point that is absolutely crucial to this entire analysis. So let's be super clear about this.
The whole point here isn't to justify behavior. Not at all. It's about understanding where it comes from. The source argues that if we can trace where these patterns began, we can get way better at predicting where they're going. It's all about prediction, so we can be prepared.
Okay, so the book argues that to understand the man, we first have to look at two foundational traumas, two deep wounds from his childhood that really shaped everything that came after.
The first wound happened at this incredibly critical age, 2.5 years old. His mother, Mary Ann, had severe postpartum complications right after his younger brother was born, and she was rushed to the hospital. The impact of this was just profound. His mom was in and out of hospitals for the better part of a year. At one point, she wasn't even expected to survive. Now, for a toddler whose entire world is built on that one single crucial attachment, that's a catastrophic abandonment. The source argues this created what it calls a phantom mother, leaving this deep-seated fear that the person you rely on most can just vanish without any warning.
And the second wound? That came from his father. Fred Trump was a tough real estate developer, and he taught his sons that the world was a fundamentally dangerous place. His core lesson, something he repeated over and over, was that you had to be a predator, a killer, just to survive. Weakness? That was simply not an option.
So, how does a little kid cope with an environment like that? You've got a missing mother on one side and a father demanding you be a killer on the other. Well, he developed what the source calls a protective armor and a playbook for survival.
His dad sent him off to New York Military Academy, hoping to straighten him out. But instead of learning humility, he pretty much learned the opposite, that his aggression was actually an asset. As our source points out, military school basically gave him a blueprint for leadership by force and ridicule.
And that blueprint got refined by let's call him a dark mentor, the infamous lawyer Roy Cohn. Cohn taught him 3 rules that he would live by for the rest of his life. Rule 1, never ever admit you're wrong. Rule 2, always attack, never defend. And Rule 3, always claim victory no matter what the reality is. So, armed with this psychological armor and Cohn's playbook, he went out and started building this powerful public persona, one that the source argues was, a lot more fiction than it was fact.
The reality of his business career, especially back in his Atlantic City days, was a really stark contrast to this myth of being the master dealmaker. This number, 6, that's how many times his casino and hotel companies filed for corporate bankruptcy.
But in the end, reality didn't matter nearly as much as television did. For 14 seasons on the reality show The Apprentice, he was edited and portrayed as America's CEO. That show completely resurrected his image, and it cemented the myth of the brilliant businessman in the public's mind.
This very blunt quote, it comes from Tony Schwartz. He was the ghostwriter for The Art of the Deal. Years later, he said he deeply regretted it, basically saying he helped create this fictional character that was way more appealing than the real man.
So when you put it all together, you stack up the wounds, the armor, the myth. These layers combine to create an operating system with deeply ingrained and, according to the source, highly predictable patterns.
The first pattern is what the source calls the vengeance algorithm. And psychologically, this isn't just about getting revenge. It's a way to reclaim a sense of power and control. It's described as this systematic, patient, and totally disproportionate program for retribution, where every single perceived slight, big or small, gets logged and has to be punished, no matter how long it takes.
The second key pattern is the loyalty trap, which is almost a perfect mirror image of that early childhood wound. Relationships are treated like one-way streets. Subordinates have to give total, unquestioning loyalty, but that loyalty is never, ever returned. The moment a person is no longer useful, just like that phantom mother, they're discarded.
And maybe the ultimate piece of evidence the source gives for these patterns being locked in for good comes from the subject's own words. He sees his lack of change not as a failure to grow, but as a point of pride. The core personality, the defenses, the entire operating system, it's all been locked in since he was a little kid.
And that brings us to the final, really provocative thought from our source material. If these psychological patterns are in fact permanent, then the argument is pretty simple. Character is destiny. The patterns of the past don't just inform the future, they dictate it. So the question it leaves us with is, what do you think?